Welcome to the Debrief with Rob and Sam, a bi-weekly Formula One show breaking down the latest F1 race, giving you a full debrief of our thoughts from the race and more. My name is Rob, he's Sam, and as always, we have a lot to talk about from the Bahrain Grand Prix.
Yes, we do, Rob. And I mean, other than Max Verstappen's dominant win, reliability issues striking again for Ferrari once again, and Fernando Alonso collecting his 99th career podium. Will he get 100 or more this season? Most likely he will, because that Aston Martin is insanely fast. Let's first talk, speaking of Fernando Alonso, what do you say, who's your driver of the day? I mean, it's got to be Fernando, I'm assuming, but...
Well, actually, I was thinking about giving it to Leclerc. No, I'm kidding. Fernando Alonso, no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
Put it, book it, stamp it in, put it in
Yep.
pen, put it in writing.
No,
Like you
exactly,
mentioned,
yeah.
99th career podium, started in P5. And I think a lot of it has to allude to not only the race. I know obviously the driver of the day kind of encapsulates what happened during the race, but
Yeah,
I feel like just the entire weekend as a whole,
for
it's
sure.
really hard not to go with them. On top of the fact that it's a fantastic start to his Aston Martin career. And
Mm-hmm.
he was all over the place right from the get-go as soon as lights went out. Started with the Russell overtake on lap 15, battle with Lewis on lap 38, and then that overtake on Sainz on lap 45 to get into the podium was just, it was incredible. It really showed that he still got it, and he still got that veteran presence that teams long for, and that's exactly why they went and picked him up.
For sure. I mean, I think it was funny because originally when we looked at last season, we all thought that Aston Martin was going to be slow. And we're like, oh, Fernando Alonso's making another bad career decision. But clearly he knew something that we didn't. And he picked the right team because that car is super fast. He was dominant all weekend. I mean, yeah, like he looked really comfortable in the car. He had a really good feeling with that circuit. And the balance of the car was just really nice. I mean, he even said on the radio, this is a lovely car to drive, which he really didn't say that much about Alpine last year or the past couple of years, at least, for sure. I think really looking, I mean, you broke it down beautifully with all the points you mentioned of all the different moments that really he had. But I mean, I don't really recap, but I fully agree with what you kind of said. And the reason why he was kind of the driver of the day, the most impressive driver from the whole weekend. He just had a really good control of the car. He made some great overtakes. And again, he proved his 22 years of racing that he has and why he deserves to be on a team that he does. So it was just brilliant driving from Fernando Alonso all through and through throughout the whole weekend. And I'm excited to see what he has in the season. I'm predicting a win at least. I'm predicting at least a win from him. I can see it happening. And within a couple races, I'd see Aston Martin is going to be fighting for wins. If with the agreement, with the improvements they make in the next couple weeks, potentially to first to Saudi and then potentially after Australia as well, I think it could be a possibility. So,
Yeah.
all righty,
So
moving on. You go ahead, yeah, for sure.
I was gonna say when you look at the race as a whole, in terms of takeaways, what do you have?
I've got a couple. I mean, most notably, Max Verstappen just, picking up where he left off in 2022, like just kind of went out, got pole position, and just dominated the whole race. There was really no doubt in mind what he was struggling. Obviously, it was an interesting decision for Red Bull to go on the softs, like to go soft and then soft again and then hard at the end. But clearly they made it work and they kind of wanted to have like a quicker tire to make the moves that they did. I mean, it did work as well because Perez was able to get past Leclerc to move up into P2. So overall, as a whole, Max Verstappen just, a great weekend. Got pole position, dominated the whole race, and just kind of picked up where he was. So that's my first takeaway from this race. What about you?
Yeah. I think building off that, as much as I did want to include the fact that Verstappen, took over and there was really no competition for first. I feel like we're
Yeah,
going to be talking about that quite a bit this season, so
yeah, that's fair.
I'll
That's fair.
I'll leave that out this time around. But
Yeah,
I did want
exactly.
to
Yeah.
mention that although Red Bull did win the race, obviously, I think Aston Martin's like the real winners from the race, because you couldn't have really asked for a better start to the season, between, like we had mentioned, Alonso's podium, but even the drive from Stroll to get into points and collect 23 points between the both of them, and
Mm-hmm.
put them second in the standings. I know obviously it's only one race and it's still early, but I think that's a dream start for them. You couldn't have really asked for much more.
Yeah, for sure. On 100%, I agree with you. Like, I mean, when you look at that compared to previous years. Like 2 years ago, we would be joking the fact that if someone said 2 years from now, Aston Martin's going to be fighting for podiums and on the podium and finishing in the points double like both cars. And the fact that Lance Stroll, finished P6, considering what he was coming back from in terms of the weekend that he had, obviously struggling with the car, and the fact that he was able to finish P6, get past George Russell as well. Like, I think that's great to see, for sure. So that's kind of I kind of have the same takeaway, I guess, was the Aston Martin really looks a fast car, competitive car, and they're definitely going to be fighting for wins in the near future, which I've kind of already mentioned. So that's kind of my second takeaway from this weekend. Is Aston Martin as a whole was winners for sure. Despite they didn't win the race, they won, I think, in terms of the midfield battle. They got a good jump on really the rest of the competition. I mean, Ferrari and both Mercedes as well. So they're looking strong for the season.
Yeah. I'll come back to Aston Martin in a bit, but I think we need to address the elephant in the room here.
Yes, we do.
And that Ferrari still cannot get their stuff, for lack of a better word, together.
Yeah.
That engine failure for Leclerc on lap 42. Just how I said, I don't think Aston Martin couldn't have asked for a better start. I don't think Ferrari could have asked for a worse start to the season, because you take a look at, not only did Leclerc obviously not finish the race, but late in the race, Sainz gives up his position to Alonso for pole. So I feel like if you just go back and look at the broadcast, as soon as Leclerc is deemed out, as soon as they tell him to retire, they pan over to everybody sitting on their chairs with their headsets on, and you can just tell like everybody's just so frustrated and so upset with each other, and nothing's going right for them. So. And like we had mentioned, a few days ago, like there is a ton of pressure on Ferrari this year, especially coming off of the season that they had, new team personnel, whatnot. So there's a ton of pressure going around on that team, and you can tell that it's really starting to get to them. And like I said, you honestly couldn't have asked for a worse start if you're Ferrari.
I just don't understand it's you can't even think to understand what the process of, you think Fred Vasseur is going to come in, for sure he's a new team principal, but people have to understand the issue wasn't as much as you want to say Matteo Binotto might have been the problem, and yes, there was some bad strategy calls, and at the end of the yes for sure, but it starts with if you can finish the race first. Like Michael Schumacher said, if you want to finish first you have to finish. So if you can't finish the race, you're not finishing any place regardless. So and I think as well, it's just interesting. I think it was also funny the fact that there was a clip where Leclerc's just sitting on the side of the track, and he's just drinking water, and I was like, immediately I knew there was going to be people who were going to make memes about that, because it's just going to be it's just unfortunate. This is what happens. Charles Leclerc, because can't believe his luck that again, he's got a competitive, not competitive compared to Red Bull, but a competitive at least to fight for podiums and fight for at least, second place in the championship. They were 3 and 4. And it's what we said as well. The fact that Carlos Sainz did finish 4th, but we said a couple of days ago that Ferrari wants to have successes that they have to finish where they qualify, which they almost sort of did. They did give up a podium Carlos Sainz did, which was unfortunate, because I'm sure Ferrari would be a lot happier if they were at least to get a podium out of their bad luck race today. But it was just unfortunate what happened. So who knows what's going to happen in the future, if they're going to be able to fix it or not. So Another thing I want to talk about for sure was, we kind of knew it. McLaren didn't look great in preseason testing. They didn't look great in practice or qualifying. Weren't expecting much, but would we expect for them to be out and down and out after the first race? Not really. They had a terrible race. Oscar Piastri had to retire the car due to an electronics issue. Lando Norris pitted 5 times, I think, during the race. It was a record high. They just kept pitting in, and then he was down in P20. It was why is he even racing at this point? He's out of the points. Just retire the car, go back to the drawing board, or go back and think what went wrong. And it's interesting because McLaren, they put a lot of money into Oscar Piastri this season, getting him obviously from Alpine. There was a whole bunch of drama last season about in Drive to Survive, or I guess this season of Drive to Survive, but last season in, Formula One, the whole drama behind it. And the fact that Alpine kind of looked out better this weekend, honestly. Alpine looked a little better. So despite what we thought in preseason testing, we weren't expecting great things from McLaren, but I think it's going to be a long season for McLaren. I'm not expecting them to finish in the points, at least for the first 4 races, because unless major upgrades are brought to Saudi or to Australia, again, budget cap is a thing. And obviously, I think, the FIA is going to be really strict on that, considering Red Bull broke it last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how teams make upgrades and where the progress that McLaren decides to go. Because it's like, said on the broadcast, like it was asked to Zach Brown, like, why are we slower? And it's like, you don't really know until you look at the data, you look at the telemetry data and figure out the finite issues behind why they were struggling so much. But it's a sad day to be a McLaren fan, to say the least. So.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention before I give my last takeaway, the broadcast curse is real. I don't know if you noticed it, but Crofty's on there and he's talking about, Oscar Piastri is the only driver to retire today. And right there, and then the next cut is Leclerc retiring the car. So the jinx is real. The curse is real. I'm just going to put that out there. But my last takeaway, and going back to Aston Martin, I want to shine a little bit of light on Lance Stroll and the race that he had, because it wasn't until a few days ago where people even knew if he was going to be racing. And then to be able to not only get in the race, obviously he had that collision on the first lap, which sure was not ideal. But then to finish P6, and like I mentioned earlier, for both drivers to finish in the points, I think that's a really, really gutsy race from him, because you could even see it afterwards in the race, whether it was Alonso in his post-race interview. He kind of dapped him up and gave him a little bit of a hug, even called him his hero. And then Stroll in his post-race interview as well said that he was feeling that a lot, and it almost like brought a tear to his eye for how much it was bothering him. So I think for all factors considered, and considering coming into this race and what happened in the first lap of the race, I think he was, if Alonso didn't do what he did, he would have been my driver of the day, to be completely honest.
Yeah, no, he did a great job. He battled hard with Mercedes. He got ahead of George Russell, which was great to see. And not many were expecting it, honestly, because I think a lot of people think that, like, I'm not saying they think highly of Lance Stroll, but comparison to Fernando Alonso, it's hard to say like, oh yeah, they're unequal. They're not unequal. Like, one's a two-time champion, one's a guy who's kind of mostly in F1 because of his dad, but also like he deserves to be there for sure. Like, he's got some skill. He showed it today. He showed some hard racing. I just think it was interesting, the fact that so what is it? Stroll hit Alonso, and Alonso was like on a mission to find out who it was, but they were like, we don't want to say because it was your teammate, and we don't want to cause any bad blood. And there was like some couple of funny radio messages back and forth between the two, like between Alonso and the team. Like, he was like Inspector Seb kind of thing. Like, he was like trying to find out, and they're like, we can't tell you. Like, we really, like, we kind of like, they were kind of beating around the bush about it, because they just, you can't really say it. So you don't really want to say it because it would just ruin the reputation, ruin the race, I feel. But it was overall a great race in my mind. I think for sure there was some good amount of overtakes, that we saw throughout the race. Track is a nice design. But I mean, it should be interesting to see what happens next year as well for the next Bahrain GP. I guess that kind of leads into your next segment of like, what would say your overall grade of this race, if you were to give it a grade?
Yeah, I think I definitely lean towards a B plus. Honestly, outside of the Alonso battle and some of the overtakes that we saw, I don't think there was really that much of a competition in terms of who's going to win. I think Verstappen ended up winning by like 11 seconds and a bit. So it really wasn't too much going on. But yeah, like you had mentioned, I enjoy the track. I love Bahrain. I never have an issue with it. I also love when races are at night. I just think it's like 10 times cooler. The way it's designed, there's a lot of opportunities to overtake, whether it be on the straights that they have in the DRS zones, or whether it be on some of the chicanes and some of the tight corners. And we saw it, just in this last race, between that battle from Alonso and Sainz alone. You could see it wasn't an overtake. It wasn't the DRS that kind of propelled him over that. It was the maneuvers in those sharp, quick corners, back-to-back turns, I should say. So
yeah, I think it was turn 9 and 10, I believe, that he made the move on, which is a really nice overtake, to say the least. So
yeah, but yeah, like I said, I don't really have an issue with this track, but I always have a good time when it's in Bahrain. So yeah, how about your grade?
I would say B minus, slightly under. I think the start of the race was good. There was some good wheel to wheel battles, but Verstappen kind of went away quickly, and then he kind of was like left in the dust of everyone else. Yeah. And then everyone else was kind of left fighting behind him. Perez didn't really have a great start, which was interesting because it kind of made up for like a good wheel to wheel battle. A little bit like there was a slight little bit of contact between Perez and Sainz and Leclerc, like kind of fighting it out, fighting for that P2 position, and then obviously Leclerc kind of jumps up all the way through close to Verstappen. And then obviously there was the Alonso battle with Hamilton, Alonso with Sainz as well. Other than that, really and I think the hard part is the fact that we don't get to see a lot of those battles because of those TV direction. Like that's the thing as well. It's like at the end of the day, it's really the producer and the director that is like directing the show to say like, hey, what camera angles do you want to show? And I think F1 can kind of needs to improve a little bit on that front because they are showing either certain battles that don't matter or certain battles that aren't as exciting, or they're showing too many replays, or like there was one point where even in the post broadcast, they were shooting the cool down room and it was like great, we could hear them, and then they just cut to a crowd shot, like a random crowd shot. I was like, why are we cutting to a random crowd shot when we're trying to like listen to what the drivers are saying and listen to their emotion and like look at their faces? Like that's the whole point. We want the cool down room was brought back because in the cool, for any intense moment that happens between drivers within teammates. So I just think it's interesting the fact that certain TV direction, I think, persuaded in the way that we kind of enjoy the race overall. But again, no issues with Bahrain. I really like the circuit layout. One thing I did notice as well, the fact that, I don't know, there's not actually a lot of spectator. Like there's one grandstand, I think, Bahrain. I think there's one Bahrain. There's one grandstand and one viewing tower. I think that's it for spectators. Like it's not a large spectator track I've noticed because of where it is. There's not actually a lot of grandstands through the track, which is really interesting because it just makes for, I guess, because I'm not saying it makes for an interesting race, but like in terms of how they lay out the track, it's kind of, It allows for, it's a bit of a safer opportunity. There's not as many barriers and walls. There's more runoff areas, which is great to have. But I just overall think it's just interesting kind of how the limited number of people that they let to kind of go see the race. I mean, they have this massive grandstand, but it was just kind of like a note. But overall, it was a pretty good race. No issues really. So, yeah.
Yeah. So when you look ahead to their next race that's slated on the calendar in Saudi Arabia, what are some things you might be looking towards or something to keep in mind?
There's about 3 things I have on my mind. There's Ferrari bounce back. How are they going to respond in 2 weeks' time? Like, what are they going to do in these 2 weeks to say this cannot happen again? Because realistically, I mean, we saw this last year with Red Bull. Like, they had a double DNF at the start of the year, and Ferrari finished 1-2, kind of like how Red Bull did. And people thought, oh no, it's over. And even after Australia, like after the 4th race or whatever it is, 3rd or 4th race, they're like, okay, like they're struggling. They're still struggling, like the reliability issue hits again. So I have a feeling, I mean, I'm not going to say it now, but I have a feeling like, this could be kind of like 2022 where Ferrari hits reliability issues early on. And then they kind of fix it up, kind of like how Red Bull did. And then they kind of make a charge back. And then maybe Red Bull, like who knows what's going to happen in weeks' time. Like Red Bull could have reliability issues down the road. They could just continue with their dominance. But I'm interested to see how Ferrari bounces back for 2 weeks' time. I have another thing to see as well, is that Mercedes looks fairly fast in terms of their overall pace, but not as quick as Aston Martin nor as Ferrari. They're not really there for the midfield, not even midfield battle, but like battle for 2nd and 3rd place. They're close there. Like they qualified with 5th and 6th, and then they kind of dropped back to 7th. So overall they looked really good. But just interesting to see kind of what improvements they make. I know Mercedes is they're a great team. They have great management, Toto Wolff. They're going to make improvements. They're going to be better for sure. They're a lot better than they started last season, 2022. So I think for sure, it's going to be interesting. And then the last thing I had was really just Red Bull dominance, if it could continue or not, but who knows? They're going to Saudi next week, in 2 weeks time. And I'm really interested to see how Max Verstappen and that Red Bull fares on that track, the new Red Bull RB19 fares, and what teams, because again, it's a super quick track, high downforce, like high downforce in Saudi, a lot of speedy corners. So it's going to be a very fast race and very interesting to see what happens. What are your kind of things to look for next race?
Yeah, I mean, just one quick thing. I know you said Red Bull dominance could continue. I know jokingly before we started, I said, don't even bother putting a question mark behind it because depending on who you ask, like George Russell says they should win every race.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's what he said. Yeah. He said the championship is sewn up because they've got a 1-2 in Verstappen won by 11 seconds, and Perez was even ahead of Sainz, or he was ahead of Alonso by like 10, 15 seconds. So they were a pretty dominant fashion car, but who knows?
Yeah. But I think I have a couple things to look forward to, but I think building off of what you had mentioned about Ferrari, and I know it's a pretty obvious answer because there's no denying that they don't have the talent to compete and be that team that they want to be. But as long as the car cooperates in a couple weeks' time, I'm anticipating a good week for Leclerc, or a good day, I should say, for Leclerc. When you look at how he performed last year on street circuits, I think it was like 4 podium finishes, whether it was, Singapore, Australia, and then he had that one DNF in Baku. But I think it's the obvious answer. Like, there's no denying that, that's issue A, issue one. But
Yeah.
as long as it cooperates next race, I don't see any problems arising for Leclerc.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention was, obviously all eyes are on Aston Martin after the race that they had. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see not only how the car fares, but even how Alonso fares, because obviously, like we had mentioned, this is his first year with the team. Um, Bahrain is kind of a track where, long straights, a lot of DRS zones, a lot of opportunities to overtake. Now you're going to a track with a total of 27 corners, or
Yeah.
27 turns, I should say. That's a huge test.
Mhm.
I'm interested to see how he handles that under the given circumstances, being in the new car. But then again, if it's anything like how it was last race, I mean, you know, lock it up, top 5 finish. So
Yeah, for sure.
it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think realistically, like first, yeah, to the Ferrari comment, I think the biggest issue, like I think, like, well, looking at where Leclerc, he had a good result last year. I think he finished P2, just behind
Yeah.
Sergio Perez in Saudi Arabia, and then obviously he had some great results in other street circuits as well. Other than, of course, the Baku DNF, again because of reliability, an engine issue, not his fault. Still, like, again,
Yeah.
other
He
than
had
that,
won in
really,
Australia. So
yeah, one in Australia as well. He won in Australia. And then obviously talking about Alonso, I think knowing Alonso's experience with kind of overall street circuits and kind of like in the racing in the past, I don't think it's going to be a huge test. I think it's more going to be a test for the car in terms
yeah.
of, I guess, what the car can handle, and in terms of if it's going to be successful or not. Because obviously Alonso can push that car to insane places and to, beyond the measure of what it's capable. We saw it this weekend compared to what Stroll kind of did, I guess. I mean, Stroll had a really good finish, but compared to
Yeah.
in comparison to I think that's going to be kind of the key focus for in 2 weeks time when we look at Saudi. But I think it's still going to be a very interesting race for in 2 weeks time, and I'm excited to see what Aston Martin can come up with. I think they'll still have a good result coming off of this weekend as well. They look poised for a potential another podium, or who knows? I mean, maybe a win. Who knows what happens? Like, you
Yeah.
never know. Saudi Arabia is a dangerous track. A driver could crash out, cause a safety car. Safety cars are really common in that track, which I think that's going to be a good race shakeup as well. In fact, if we can have one or two safety cars in Saudi Arabia in 2 weeks time around Jeddah, a very fast circuit, prone to high number of crashes, with drivers. It could make for an interesting race.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that's going to do it for this episode of The Debrief. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the Intermission Sports and the Overline Sports to catch up on all news, major announcements, and more around the 4 major sports, including motorsports, F1, NASCAR, IndyCar, whatever you fancy. And we will see you not next weekend, but in 2 weeks' time for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. My name is Sam. He's Rob, and we'll catch you in 2 weeks' time. Peace.